Top NBA stars that are in the worst situations. Let's get into this. Quickly before we get the video started, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more NBA content just like this one, hit that subscribe button and that post notification bell. Anyways, back to the video. The NBA has always been superstar driven. When you look around the NBA and you look at the best teams, you talk about the Brooklyn Nets, Los Angeles Lakers, and other teams similar to that. And when you look at the roster of all these teams, not only do they have one superstar on their team, but they have multiple superstars, which really shows you that superstars rule the NBA. And the more superstars you have, in theory, the better chance you have to winning an NBA championship. And that's the reason every single NBA team around the league is always looking to bring in a superstar to their team. There's a bunch of different ways you can bring a superstar to your team. The most basic way to do so is through the NBA draft. Either you have a very high draft pick, or maybe you just get very lucky and you draft later on in the draft, and whatever player you draft actually turns out to be a fantastic player in the NBA and turns out to be a superstar for you. So that's one method you can do so. Another method, which is a little more difficult, is actually trading for a superstar. You're going to have to give up a ton of talent and a ton of pieces that you've been building up over the years in order to do so, but of course we see it basically each and every season that an NBA superstar does get traded to another team. So that's another way you can do so, and the third way is through NBA free agency. We see this basically every single year and every single offseason that superstars, especially nowadays, are switching teams more often than ever. Just recently we saw Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving sign with the Brooklyn Nets, two absolute superstars, and in Kevin Durant, maybe one of, if not the best player we have in the NBA. So that's another option to bring an NBA superstar to your organization. Now, although this doesn't happen often, there are a few occasions where some superstar players go to a team that just isn't good whatsoever, and it's just a terrible situation. Maybe the player got drafted to the team, or maybe they got traded to them, or maybe they even signed with them in free agency, but for whatever reason that team just wasn't good and it was just a bad situation for that superstar player. So in this video I'm going to talk about a few of those superstar players that are currently on teams that are just a terrible situation for them. The first player I want to talk about is Bradley Beal. So Beal might not be one of those players that are universally known as a superstar in this league, but in my opinion, based on the numbers that he's putting up on offense, I think it's pretty clear that he's playing to a superstar level in the league. What Beal could do on the offensive side is just incredible. He's a fantastic three-point shooter. That's what he came into the NBA being known as, just a great catch and shoot three-point guy. But now not only is he a great catch and shoot three-point shooter, he can also do side steps, step backs, cross over into a three-point shot, come off a high screen and quickly pull up for a three-point shot. Is a very clean shot as well. His mid-range is fantastic. Catch and shoot, pull up, post turnaround fadeaway, especially that's pretty incredible for his size. Driving all the way to the basket, he has crafty layups, can finish with either hand, either right or left, has a nice floater within his game, can dunk over you at times, has above average athleticism. And although Beal is a shooting guard and is 6'5", which is undersized of course, he does make up for it with his crazy scoring ability in general, but certainly above average athleticism as well certainly helps him out. But of course Bradley Beal does play for the Washington Wizards, and over the past few seasons the Wizards have definitely been a bottom feeder of the NBA. And when you look around on the roster, it's pretty clear that the Wizards are in a rebuild mode at this point in time, and all the main players they have on the roster are not on the same timetable as Beal is. And for that reason, you would think Beal would want to leave this organization, and plenty of times he had the opportunity to do so, but every time that Beal had the opportunity to leave, either in free agency, maybe he could have just signed with another team, or maybe more recently where he actually said he was thinking about requesting a trade, but every time he had the opportunity, he always declined it. And he made it very clear that he wants to be a Washington Wizard for the rest of his career, and wants to be very loyal to the team that drafted him, which is very commendable. But if Beal ever wants to compete for an NBA championship, or at the very least compete in the playoffs and make the playoffs and actually make it deep within the playoffs, I think he should probably look to move to a different situation. If Beal was on a championship contender and was making it deep within the playoffs, I think a lot more people would know who he is and really put some more respect on his name. As I mentioned before in the video, I think Bradley Beal is clearly a superstar based on the numbers that he's putting up each and every season, but I also said before in the video, I don't necessarily think Beal is universally recognized as a superstar talent. But I think if he actually went to a championship contender and was consistently playing on the NBA's biggest stage in terms of playing on national TV during the regular season, but also when it came down to the playoffs, playing in multiple playoff playoff series and maybe even making it to the NBA Finals and winning an NBA championship possibly, I think a lot of people would put a lot more respect on his name, and not only could he make more money in terms of his contract, endorsements and all that, but also he would have a lot more respect from the NBA world and a lot more recognition. And overall, I don't think Bradley Beal with this Wizards organization is really going to do anything of value, probably for the next few seasons at the very least. So that's why I added Beal to this list of NBA stars in a bad situation. But the next guy I want to talk about is KarlAnthony Towns. So Karl has been in the league for some time now, and I think it's also clear when you look at Karl's game that he's at the very least a star player in this league. What he can do in terms of his three-point shooting ability for his size, his mid-range shooting ability, post turnaround fadeaway, great touch around the basket in terms of his post hooks and push shots around the basket, his ability not only to run the pick and roll and dunk over people at times or finish around them, but also the ability to run the pick and pop very effectively. He also improves his passing and playmaking ability as of late. On the defensive side of the ball, it's definitely something that he has been struggling upon, but at the same time, over the last few seasons, he's definitely gotten a lot better at it than he was in the past, and he's still pretty good with those weak side blocks. Overall, when you look at Karl's game, he's clearly a star at the very least in my opinion. But when you look at the situation that he's in with the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think that's also a situation that's not the greatest for him. Now, of course, for a very long time, the Timberwolves were basically terrible and a bottom feeder of the NBA, but when you look at the team they have now, it's definitely a lot better than it was in the past. But I think all the excitement about having KarlAnthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and Anthony Edwards was there at the start, but after the season they had this previous year, which was a complete disappointment, I think once again, all the excitement that went into that is basically gone at this point. And I don't know if that situation is necessarily a good situation for Towns. Now, the thing about Karl, and the one thing that he differs from Bradley Beal, is there was actually a point in time not too long ago, basically last season or a season before that Towns was very close to requesting a trade from the Timberwolves. And then the Timberwolves ended up bringing in D'Angelo Russell and also drafting Anthony Edwards to please KarlAnthony Towns. And if this situation with the big three that they brought in doesn't end up working, and currently at this point it seems like it's not working, of course next season they could go in and it could completely work and the Timberwolves could be in the playoff hunt, maybe even make the playoffs and make some noise. Of course that could happen, but at this current moment it doesn't necessarily seem that likely, especially when you look at all the other teams around the Western Conference that got a lot better from last year. So if they don't get better and basically they're a disappointment once again, I don't necessarily think this situation is very good for KarlAnthony Towns. And I think if he were to go to a situation that's at the very least a legitimate playoff contender in terms of being a pretty high seed in the Western or Eastern Conference and making some noise once they make it to the playoffs, or even a team that's at that currently, and maybe if they add a guy like KarlAnthony Towns, they could potentially be a championship contender going forward, I think that would be a fantastic situation for him, and certainly a lot better of a situation than he is on currently with the Timberwolves. I think KarlAnthony Towns certainly has the ability and talent to be, at the very least, the second best player on a championship contender. And I would honestly like to see a guy of the talent that he has finally get to a team where he could actually display that in the playoffs and maybe deep into the playoffs and see what kind of player he could eventually become. So Towns is another player that I think is clearly a superstar, but isn't in necessarily a great situation. But the last player that I want to touch upon is Damian Lillard. So Dame is in a little bit of a different situation than the other two guys. First of all, he's clearly a lot better than the other two guys I mentioned, but also the team that he plays for, the Blazers, are also a lot better than the other two teams I mentioned. The Blazers basically each and every season are in the playoffs. Sometimes they win a playoff series, maybe even two if they get lucky, but basically the situation and the predicament that Dame and the Blazers are in currently is they can't figure out how to actually do anything once they make it to the playoffs. Maybe winning a playoff series is nice when you first start out, but eventually you're expecting a little bit more than just winning one, maybe two playoff series if you get lucky. Eventually, and the point that the Blazers and Dame are at currently, is you would expect a team like that to eventually at the very least make it to the Western Conference Finals and then eventually make it to the NBA Finals and win a championship. But it seems that currently they're just getting worse and worse, and they're basically nowhere near championship contention at this point. Now, similar to Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard is the most loyal player we have in the NBA. But this previous season, I wouldn't necessarily say he was close to requesting a trade, but he was as close to requesting a trade as he ever was in the past, and eventually something's going to have to give with the Blazers. Either they're going to really have to look themselves in the mirror and truly improve this roster significantly, or they're just going to be at the same point they are at currently, and maybe eventually Dame would request a trade down the line if the Blazers don't do anything. And I know this is not necessarily his style, but if Dame were to go to a super team or just a team that was a championship contender like the Los Angeles Lakers if they didn't have Russell Westbrook, Westbrook, or maybe the Brooklyn Nets if they didn't have Kyrie, or just maybe the Milwaukee Bucks or whatever, just a championship contender down the line, I think it would be a great situation for him, and clearly he would be able to win an NBA championship. I think he's probably the most talented point guard, true point guard we have in the NBA, in my opinion, over Steph Curry, which might be a little controversial, but I just think Dame is that good. And the reason why I wanted to add Dame to the list isn't necessarily that his team isn't making the playoffs, but it's just they kind of hit a stalemate and aren't really doing much after making the playoffs. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you guys agree with the list that I listed out in this video, or do you not agree? Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.